Now that we've shared and we are ready to begin, I'm Kinky Karl, Kurly Karl, and this is my mom. Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Susan.
And you have a graphics design business. What is that called?
I have a small graphic design business called Dynamite Graphics by Susan. I do ads and advertising media for small businesses.
So today we're really here to talk about my mom's upbringing, when she was born, where she was born, how she was raised, that sort of thing. She has quite a tale to tell. And we plan on doing more of these, kind of extending through her life and her journey to the present day. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start. When were you born, Mother?
I was born in 1945 in Glencoe, Minnesota, which is a sleepy little town about 60 miles west of Minneapolis. Now, times were a lot different in 1945, believe me.
Keep going.
My mother was only 17. My father had just gotten out of the military. It was at the very end of World War II, so I'm a baby boomer. We lived on a farm with my grandfather's parents, my grandparents. There was no running water, no electricity, no plumbing. We had oil lamps to read by. We had a battery-operated radio that my grandfather would listen to late at night. If we needed water, we went out to the pump and pumped it out of the well and brought it back in buckets into the house. We used that for cooking, and I had to take my bath in a number 2 wash tub. Now, I'm a small person now, and I was really small then. So we got up early. We had to tend to the chickens and the cows and the pigs and a regular farm life that you would find it very difficult to find nowadays. An economy that should have stayed more to encourage families to stay together. But the lure of the city, especially after the war, tempted a lot of the men to go to the city to make a living, which is what my father ended up doing.
Let's talk about your grandfather and back when you were little and the kind of connection y'all had with books and reading at the farm.
Well, my grandfather was an avid reader. Of course, like I said, we read by oil lamp light, and we usually did our reading during the night because during the day you had lots and lots of chores. My first book was actually the Bible, which my grandfather taught me to read, and I was reading by the time I was 2.5. I lived with my grandparents for the first 5 years of my life due to a family situation with my parents. And so I read the Bible. By the time I was 5, I had read the Bible front to back twice.
Wow.
And then he had a wide collection of old books, which I read all the time. And I read every day to this day.
And so from what I gathered from what you've told me before as well, is he was the one that you most connected to in your inner circle, in your inner family?
Well, he was not one to speak much, but when he spoke, you paid attention. And we connected as far as nature was concerned because I loved being outside, and we plowed the fields, and I rode the mule while he went behind it with the old-timey plowing thing. And we spent a lot of time outdoors. I was never much for the inside for the kitchen work. And my grandmother talked all the time, which is probably where I get my incessive compulsive
What was
talking.
her name?
They were Joseph and Josephine Pika. They were both born and raised in Czechoslovakia. and came over here as small children and lived in the same community, and of course had things to do with the same families, and ended up marrying and having 10 children, of which 6 survived. My father was the youngest.
Speaking of which brings me to an interesting fact about how your mother and your father came on the same boat. Can you go into that further?
Not my mother and my father. My grandfathers that I just spoke about, they did not come over on the same boat. They came over at a different time. Now, my mother's parents actually came over on the same boat at the same time. My grandmother was 6 months old. My grandfather was 2 years old. They were from Prussia, which is now part of Russia, I believe. They came over, settled in a small community in Minnesota, and grew up together. My grandmother actually got pregnant with my mother, and then so they had to get married because that's what you did back then. But all of my grandparents are from across the continent. But it was my mother's parents that came over on the same boat. My father's parents came over at different times, but settled in the same community.
And from the same area they traveled from, correct?
Yes.
So it's basically German descent.
Is basically a German descent, Czechoslovakia and Prussia, pretty much German.
Interesting. So let's get to your rheumatic fever for 6 months.
My rheumatic fever, you always mispronounce that.
How do you pronounce it?
Rheumatic fever.
There's rheumatic.
Rheumatic. You always pronounce it with a P because that's how it's spelled. Sorry, folks. Just a little bit of ants right there between mother and child. When I was 9 years old, we were living in Mound, Minnesota, which is actually the home of Tonka Toys, if anybody knows what Tonka Toys is. And I was 9 years old, and I caught rheumatic fever, which is kind of like an epidemic that polio ended up being quite a while later. But rheumatic fever is a condition of the heart where it cannot pump enough blood to keep your body going. And of course, medicine was so much different back then that their big cure, was sleep. So my bedroom was a converted attic. Excuse me.
Foster? She just recently quit smoking, thank the Lord.
So because of the disease, it was difficult for me to go up and down the stairs. So I was fortunate that in our house, which my father and his brothers built up from a basement. Anyway, we had big, huge picture windows that looked out into the neighborhood. Our house was on 6 acres of land, and almost all the homes around them were like that. So my view was of the nature, and there was a bench bed around the corner of that picture window. That is where I made my bed, and that was where I stayed for 6 months. The doctors came to our house every day and took blood. Now, that's one of the reasons I do not like needles whatsoever right now. And then just to keep me in check. And eventually I got stronger, and we had to leave Minnesota because the cold was too much for me. But while I was having rheumatic fever, they rented out my room to a local school teacher. So she would bring me my work home. And so I never skipped a beat as far as education is. In fact, I firmly believe that that's why I advanced, because I graduated from high school when I was 17 because I had skipped a grade during the time that I was ill.
And let's talk about how that
rheumatic
fever kind of affected the rest of your life? Because you really don't get sick. You really have never been sick since.
No, I don't get sick, and I firmly believe that my body, because of the long-term rest that it got, built up its immune system to be able to fight so many things off. I don't get sick, knock on wood. I am very cautious. I try to exercise every day and eat right. But I think my body actually fights disease easier because it was fighting a disease for so long. But I'm not a doctor. I don't even like doctors. Don't go to them. But that's my take on it.
I think it's an interesting fact because you were so young, and those are kind of development years for people and their younger years, and that you went through that traumatic event that, like you said, it really built up your immune system and kind of prepared your body for anything to come, really. It's very interesting hearing you talk about your life on the farm. Let's go a little further into, when you started getting in school. I know you were into drumming. I know you were into shorthand. Can we get into some of that?
You just skipped probably 20 years of my life. I didn't get into drumming until I was in the 8th grade. We moved a lot. My mother liked to move. And I still, to this day, even though she's been gone for 15 years, do not know why she liked to move. We would build a house, and then 2 years later, all of a sudden, we'd go build another house, sometimes in a similar city, but many times in different states. I went to 14 different schools because she didn't like to sit still. When we moved to Dallas, when I was in the 8th grade, I took up drumming, and I wanted to be in the band. I didn't have enough air energy to do the clarinet because that was my first choice, which is a side effect of the rheumatic fever. And so I took up drumming. And the reason I took up drumming was because my mother did not have to buy an instrument. All she had to buy was some drumsticks and a practice pad. And I ended up buying those myself through my babysitting money. My mother was very much into my mother. She did not take much time to have an interest in her children. I graduated with honors, never had anything but a straight A through my entire school experience. And she never went to any of my events. I was in the drama club. I was in the band. I was in all kinds of things. The Glee Club, you name it, I joined because that was how I learned to be accepted by the new people I was around. Otherwise, it was going to be a very lonely life. But I took into drumming, and it led to nothing except having a great experience in a band for 4 years.
Let's talk about, because I know you had a really close relationship with your shorthand teacher. So can you go more into your shorthand class and the kind of connection you had with your teacher?
We moved to Tucumcari, New Mexico, in the summer between the 10th grade and the 11th grade. So I like to learn. I love to learn. I still try to learn something new every day. A day that you don't learn something is a wasted day. But I was majoring in business because at that time, that's what women did. You either went into business or you got married and had kids and lived happily ever after. But I had my business teacher was also my shorthand teacher. And I was very quick with it. I'd already learned how to type 120 words a minute on a manual typewriter. And I learned shorthand because that was a very necessary part of getting a secretarial job, because that was tape recorders and all that stuff was still not into the world. I mean, like I said, a manual typewriter. We got 2 electric typewriters in our high school class the senior year, and you only got to use them 1 week around the year because you had to share with everybody. But my shorthand teacher, every teacher had a student assistant. And since I was always the new kid on the block trying to fit in, I became her assistant. And she inspired me to want to be a teacher. She referred me to her old college in Amarillo, which we actually went to go visit.
Wow.
And I got a full scholarship to that college. But then my mother decided she wanted to move again, which was then from New Mexico to Florida. Like I said, at that time, I was only 16. And my mother, you did not say no to. If mother said we were moving, you never went, oh, well, no, I want to stay and go to college. But no, we moved. So I never went to college. Ended up meeting a guy and did not live happily ever after.
Well, I want to get into that actually. But so you really enjoyed shorthand?
Yes, I still do know how to do it, use it today.
Wow, because yeah, shorthand really intrigues me. How it's just kind of lines and dots,
It's symbols,
but it actually says a sentence. And
yes, it actually does.
It's like a coded language,
right? Yeah.
So, to end the day off, we're gonna do many more of these, and I'm gonna try to get better at this. But let's get into that first love and why you didn't live happily ever after and why that ended and, you know, the whole story. Let's go ahead and delve into it. Let's start off with how y'all met.
Well,
what his name was.
Like I said, we moved to Kinky, New Mexico when I was fixing to be a junior. I went into typing class, which was the last class of the day. And I got to admit, I may look old and ugly now. Back then, I was a hot little piece of meat. And his name was Glenn Gardner. Tall, dark, and handsome. We sat next to each other in the typing class. And after the typing class was over with, he asked me if I wanted to go to a pep rally. I said yes. That was the rest of history for that year because we were together from then forward until the summer between the junior and senior year. And then his parents were afraid that I was going to go get knocked up like his sister did and ruin his life, which was not on my mind because I wanted to go to college. And they broke us up, and my senior year was kind of sad because of that.
Not only did they break you up, but they actually moved.
They actually moved him to a little town about 15 miles away where his cousin lived, and he went to school there instead of graduating with us.
Wow. It's like so amazing hearing your story and where you come from. I've heard it, but I definitely think other people should hear it. And I'm very excited to do more of these. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed telling your story. Is there anything else you would like to finish the discussion off with?
No, I have a lot to say about how life has changed from when I was born to what it is now, and yet how life has not changed that much from when it was then as to what it is now. I'll be thinking of some things that I think would interest people. And if you have any questions about what life has been since 1945 until 2021, just ask me. I'll be happy to talk about it. Thank you.
And on that note, I hope y'all have a wonderful day. Thank you for tuning in. And we both love you. Mwah.
Au revoir, Shetty.
Au revoir, Shetty.